So today's presenters, again, my name is Matthew Peoples. I'm the host of the call today. And I've got two of our resources that are part of our presentation. I've got Cherwell Dotson that's going to be talking about change management design and best practices. And then Mary Lynn Lawrence, who runs our professional services organization, is going to talk some specifics around Cherwell and how we see this working in Cherwell. So since I'm the host of today's call, you will notice that you've got the ability to ask chat questions in your window. We've got all the phone lines muted. We've got a large number of attendees that are on these calls, so it's difficult if we open up the phone lines for anyone to ask questions. So it's best if you will frame up your questions in the chat window, direct them specifically to me. You'll see my name as the host, and I am the chairperson, Matthew Peoples. So ask away with any questions you've got, and I will be happy to present those to Cheryl Lynn or Mary Lynn as we go through the presentation today. You can always ask questions as well by emailing us specifically at consulting@ampemail.com. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about who we are as a company. I will do that towards the end of the presentation. I know that a lot of people have got a lot of questions around change management. Actually, I see questions coming in already. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Cheryl Lynn and let her get started. So Cheryl Lynn, you should be unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Excellent. I can hear you fine. So Cheryl Lynn, I'm going to pull up your next slide and let you go ahead and begin.
All right, so I'm just going to talk a little bit more on the process side and what change management is. Starting it off with the definition of change. For many organizations, the definition of change management varies, but truly a change is defined as an addition, a modification, or a removal of anything that could impact an IT service. So this could be something as small as changing the length of a field to potentially patching hundreds of servers or replacing out servers. How your organization defines change is really based on your process and what you feel is those items that have the most amount of risk that could impact your business. So keep in mind there's a true definition of it, and then there's also the practical application of it within your organization. And we'll get to the next slide. Some of the things that I come across most frequently when it comes to an organization trying to implement change management is really from a people perspective. You have people, process, and tool, right, that takes in order to implement change management. So there's a couple of things that help an organization transition to a more formal change management process. First of all, it's basically cultivating an environment where you don't have a tolerance for changes that occur without being documented or following your documented process. Typically speaking, I'm sure all of you guys have seen it. There's the guy from networking who just puts in that firewall rule thinking it's not going to impact somebody, and it ends up doing so. Or some other little changes that a different part of the IT organization felt would not impact any organization, and next thing you know, the service desk is receiving calls on things that impacted them due to that change, not going through that proper process. The other thing is defining what that change criteria is and the authorization requirements. Change management in its pure sense, typically speaking, will have a CAB, a change board that will review changes and approve them. Those change boards should typically encompass your management team or people from all areas within IT in order to do the approvals. In some organizations that are smaller, that's not practical. A change CAB could be represented by a change manager. So you have to define what authorization requirements really fit your organization. And the third bullet here is an important one. Really decide what is of business value and what you want to measure and report on. You want to make sure that when you're implementing that change management process, that your business is receiving value from doing it. If you implement a change management process that is cumbersome, you will then impact the rate at which you can do change and potentially the rate at which your business is successful. The next bullet talks about the segregation of duties. It is very important that as you are going through and creating your change management process, that your people who are submitting requests are not necessarily the ones who are approving requests. So you need to kind of keep that in mind as you're going through and you're defining your change management process. Communication. This is one of those areas where when we've done surveys of the customers, IT customers, one of the biggest things that come out of those conversations are typically the fact that the customers are not notified of changes that are occurring. So they are receiving that notification or by discovery finding it out after the fact. So communication with your business is always very important. Ensure that there is an awareness within IT of the value of the change management process. As you're going through the process of implementing change, if your IT department itself is not able to see the benefits of why you're implementing the change or understand the reasonings for it, maybe it may be regulatory or other reasons may have occurred, they will have a tendency to be more resistant to that change and try to come up with ways to go around the process that's out there. And then the last is, yes.
So we got a question I think that fits right in line with what you're saying there. A question came in about the difference between change management, which is what we're talking about today, and organizational change management. From what I'm guessing from this question is they're under an organizational change management project in their organization today. Can you speak to a moment about the difference between OCM and change management?
Well, when we're speaking of change management itself, we're talking about the process of implementing change. And it's not actually also OCM that typically gets confused. A lot of people will confuse as well release management with change management too. So the change management itself is really the actual changing of an environment that impact the services versus an organizational change, which is encompassing not only a change per se, but you are talking about the organization as a whole and how it manages it.
I like the point that you said just a few minutes ago around if we don't explain the value of a change in our organization, people look for a way around it. And I know when Bill does a presentation, he uses that Woody Allen video clip of he's an attorney, he's used to paper files, he likes his paper files, he always wants his paper files, he goes away on vacation, and IT comes in and scans all his files and makes them digital, and they never explain to him, you still got your files, here's how you access it. They just tell him your files are gone, and if you need them, you need to go look online, and he doesn't understand that because he's an old school attorney. That's a perfect example of how that's an organizational change management. They didn't explain to him why his files went away, and they didn't explain to him how to get to them or where they're at. They just took them away and never said, hey, this is a whole lot easier. Now you can search by keywords and all this other information compared to change management, which is managing just a specific thing in your environment. So.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example. Another thing that I find quite common within organizations is IT as a whole across the board typically has its silos. You have your networking team, your database team, your applications team, and you'll find even within them, some of them will have defined a change management process so that when you go to define one as an organization, there will be some resistance there because there are some groups who feel that they've mastered change management and don't understand why everyone within the IT organization has to follow the same change management process.
So Sherilyn, we've got one of our long-term friends that we've got on the webinar today that has been responsible and worked in change for a long time, Mr. Jeffrey Rabinowitz. I don't know if you remember Jeff, but I love what he says here in the kind of the chat back to me here is change management is more focused on hardware, software, and OCM or organizational change management is people, right? It's the people side of change management. Yeah, Jeff,
yep.
I appreciate that. All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail you there, Sherilyn. Just there was lots of good questions that were coming in off of that I wanted to bring up. So just as a reminder, I see we continue to have people join the webinar. If you've got questions, all phone lines are muted. So if you want to ask a question, feel free to do so in your chat window. Direct those specifically to myself, Matthew Peoples, and I will bring them up as we're talking through this conversation. So Sherilyn, go ahead and pick it back up.
Hey, Sherilyn, it's Mary Lynn. Boy, everybody, we're only going to hire Lynn people at AMC from now on. Just a couple of points here, too. We will get off this slide, but I was thinking from an implementation perspective here, a couple of things that we've recently hit that sort of speak to these. So like the first bullet where you have the no tolerance for unauthorized change, I find more and more that people do have no tolerance for unauthorized change, but what they're working on more is having a low tolerance for emergency changes. And I know you're going to get into the different types of changes later, but when emergency changes become the norm, that's definitely a flag that we've seen to get upper management involved and change the culture. And one other piece that I just wanted to bring up is that we've had a lot of people then that want to formalize their change management, and they really get into it in a really robust way. But we've had people swing the other way, that by the time they formalize it and put all of the rigor into it, they're having to relook at what they've done, because we've had a couple of customers that say, but now we have it takes 20 minutes to raise a change, and that's counterproductive too. So, it's finding that balance between being, getting the organization ready for this, not being tolerant for unauthorized, but making the implementation itself flexible enough that it doesn't make people want to run and flee.
Yeah, and both those are really good points into the last bullet that's actually on this slide, right? Defining your critical success factors. For some organizations, to your first point, right, the critical success failure would be reducing the amount of emergency changes from 50% down to 25%, within a year's time. You got to come up with realistic ones, obviously, as you're going through and doing this. So that's one of the things where your critical success failures really become a part of your business requirements. It's the 80% process and people, right, and the 20% tool. Some organizations, who are just getting started in change will definitely try to take advantage of things like Cherwell, which have all of that stuff that's built, and that's great and that's wonderful. But as an organization, you should define really what are you trying to achieve from change management, and what is it going to take to report on that and get to that as well, so that you understand whether you're actually meeting those goals that you're creating. All right. So to one of Mary Lynn's points, talking about change types. You'll notice on this slide I actually include 4 different change types. And the reason I do that is because one of the things that we do find is that a lot of companies will use an emergency change as something that needs to be done quickly. And really, by definition, an emergency change is due to a service failure or impairment. And within an organization, within a business, you will find that you have what I would term, and what a lot of organizations will also agree with, as an expedited change. These are requests that come from the business, but they have a very time-sensitive nature to them. So not are they a result of something that's broken, but they are something that they need to get into the system real quick. So when working with a lot of organizations, we have identified the expedited change, which is really, in essence, it's something that has to be done in an accelerated format, but we don't want to classify those as truly emergency changes, because they're not. They're just requests from the business or potentially within IT that are really just urgent and need to get done. So they can't follow the normal process of approvals potentially. They may have to go on some accelerated time frame. But to go back to the top 2, the standard change. Again, standard changes should be those changes that your organization defines as low risk. I will say that, in my opinion, there's no such thing as no risk. So anytime I've seen that on a tool, I kind of laugh, because everything has a amount of risk to it. But these are low risk changes that your organization as a whole has decided that you don't need to collect formal approval, because the change has been done repetitively, or the risk, again, is very low to the organization to be done. Typically speaking, standard changes will start out as a normal change and then be nominated into a standard change. So those could be things from anywhere from a firewall change in some organizations, and again, in some organizations those aren't a standard change, to extending a field in a table, to any type of data-related type issues that may be out there. Your normal changes will be, typically speaking, your 75% or more. Those are the ones that will go through the formal process. That process typically being you're going to initiate that request, you're going to assess and review it, you're going to approve it, you're going to implement it, and then potentially have a post-implementation review whenever there are failures that occur. Does anybody have any questions in regards to the change types?
So the only thing that came in during that was more of a comment, and it's around that emergency change. Sherilyn, in your opinion, when customers are doing this, that's something they really need to have clearly defined. What is an emergency change? For example, right, the comment that came in is that it really should be something that's restoring service. So something is down, not working, dead in the water, and we need to get it restored, or it could be some type of mandated regulation change we've got to have by a certain date. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't necessarily go with the mandated regulation because unless that happened as a result of something else. Again, by definition, typically an emergency should be a service failure or impairment. That being said, depending in some organizations, they may classify regulated as an emergency change. I like to, when I'm going through and defining that as an expedited change because it truly isn't necessarily a result of something that is broken, but something that needs to be enacted in a quick manner.
Perfect. Okay.
All right. Okay. Some key elements, basically, when we're talking about change management, these are things that before you begin your implementation, you really need to start thinking through and have some sort of idea of what you're wanting to do. First is the method of creation. You always have that manual process of creating change records, but there are so many other things that could initiate a change record. I will tell you I've worked with many customers, especially with application services, that use a tool such as Jira or any type of any software life cycle type stuff where the application stuff where they want to initiate the change request based on information that they're working on. So that's, other ways. So you need to kind of think through how you're going to be creating changes. You need to think about scheduling. Some organizations have processes in place where they only put changes in, let's say, every Tuesday evening at 10 o'clock. So you want to think about that scheduling. And the other thing that comes in with the scheduling is once you get into a mature change management process, you want to have the ability to approve those changes, let's say 7 days ahead of time or 10 days ahead of time of the actual schedule record. So you want to start incorporating some guidelines as to when people are going to be submitting changes and when those approvals have to occur. When you're just starting out in change management, sometimes those approvals are, Tuesday at 5 p.m., so it can be done Tuesday at 10 p.m. But as your organization matures and you get comfortable with the change management process, you really should have a larger window between the time that you have to approve and the time that you need to enact. That allows you to do schedule changes when emergencies come up and other things that make your organization a little bit more flexible. Approvals, again, this depends from organization to organization. What we see as a best practice is usually the submitter's manager will review or approve it first, and then it'll go through some sort of CAB in order to get that final review. So you're basically having a technical sign-off specific to that change, and then you're having a business sign-off by the CAB to enact that. So you need to kind of think through your approvals. Now, in some organizations, the organization's not big enough to have an approval, have a formal CAB, and others it is. I'll tell you, I worked with a technical college that had basically no change management process defined. They had previously tried many times to do it. They'd end up with CAB meetings that lasted an hour, hour and a half long, and that really wasn't realistic on a daily basis or on a weekly basis for which they were having it. After we got through and defined all of their processes for change management, they basically had a 30-minute meeting once a week, and they felt it very beneficial. And it's still going on today, which is about 5 years since we did their actual change management process. So you need to be able to define that. Your workflow as well. I think it was Matthew, to your point, or it might have been Mary Lynn. Some people have gone to the extreme when they're defining their change management processes. And when they go to actually create the change, it takes 20 minutes just to get it started. So if you're new to change management, I always say keep it simple. If you are a little bit further along in your management process, then you can create a more complex workflow and then use the tool to help facilitate that. And then, of course, compliance. If you have any regulatory type stuff that you need to encompass in change management, that stuff is very important to understand and identify up front so that as you're defining your processes and how you need your tool configured, that information is there.
Hey, Sherilyn, one other thing. First of all, if it was smart and it sounded good, it must have been me saying it and not Matthew, so I think it was probably me. Around the approvals, when we were talking about the 20 minutes to open up a change, the other extreme that we've seen, and I think, I'm not sure if you're going to be talking about roles later or not, but, the change manager is just so critical on this. And, we've had a couple of customers that go to the extent of wanting to automate the approvals and not have anything be manual, and we call that one the if it's a full moon and the water's low kind of thing. And so you can get a little crazy on the automation of these approvals because the tool sure can do it. That the change manager needs to play a key role in some of that and not make it into this just highly customized approval engine system.
Yeah, I will tell you what I've seen is the more successful an organization is, typically will be around having that change manager role. And I'm going to say it as a role because a lot of organizations may not have one person to dedicate to it. They may have 2 or 3 who play that change manager role and facilitate that. The other comment that I always make to clients when I go there and we start taking requirements is remember this, your tool does not have a crystal ball. So it has to make intelligent decisions based on data you provide it. So if you create an approval process that is very complex, most likely you're going to have to feed that tool that complex logic and that information. And a lot of times that will lead an organization into trouble further down the line when they try to change things the first time. All right, Matthew, do we have any questions?
We do. Actually, Mary Lynn, you may have to jump into this because some of this I think is specific to Cherwell. You got to talk about approvals, and that's when this question came in. If we're talking about today internal change management to an organization, but the question that came in is related to external customers. So if they're doing some level of change management that impacts a customer of the company, and that customer needs to do an approval. So without saying who the customer is, they are in the telecom space. We'll leave it at that. So you can understand that they're making changes to their infrastructure that will impact a customer. And the customer needs to approve that change. How does that fit in everything we're talking about today? Because we're really talking about IT change management, internal change management, but now it's impacting a third party or an external customer. The question, Mary Lynn, is can we do that with Cherwell? Can a customer approve that? So I'll let you answer that from a tool standpoint, but Sherilyn, if you also want to make a comment around approvals and how third parties can interact in a change management environment, just best practices from that standpoint.
But I'll start. We have a M app out there for customer-based approval, so I'm going to address it that way first, Matthew. I think a third party or something like that is happens, but I think more commonly what Sherilyn and I are seeing is that the business stakeholders and their approval and minimally their notification, but also their approvals are an important part of this. And out of box with Cherwell, you need to be a user to be part of the approval engine that's there. But we are able to extend that to allow customers, end users, business stakeholders who aren't users of the system, and it won't take up a license, be able to either approve via email after reviewing the change or go in via the portal, see what's pending their approval, see some information about that change, and be able to approve it. So I think it's really important to be able to extend it to those business stakeholders and have them do the approval process, and it's really pretty easy to extend the approval capability of Cherwell to do that.
Yeah, and then to add on to that, definitely there is a trend to have the business involved in change management. Some companies will use them just as reviewers. Some of them will use them for formal approvals. But the reason why that trend is on the upswing as well is when you get into configuration management and you start defining your services and your applications, it is very important that you start defining who your owners are, whether they be your application owners or your business owners, because those are really the stakeholders. Those are the people who you're trying to produce a change for to enhance the business. So yes, it is definitely something that you will see quite common in change management, and again, taking it to the next step into configuration management as well and your business services. All right, any other questions?
Yes, lots of questions, but I'm going to wait and ask them to you when you get done with your next slide, I think.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up here with just kind of a getting started, and then I'm going to hand it off to Mary Lynn so she can show you some of the stuff in Cherwell. Getting started, I would strongly encourage everyone to review their current state and decide and start framing out what their desired future state is. Those are some important things that you need to identify. There are going to be some things that you like what you do today and some things that you don't. So start kind of framing that out in your mind, what it looks like. Define your repeatable processes. As both a process consultant and a technical consultant, this is an extremely important one. When you get into defining both your process and your tool, if you focus on the things that happen 20% of the time instead of the 80% of the time, it takes a lot longer to get out of the gate, and it seems to make your system a lot more complex. So those things that you know are repeatable and happen, focus on that 80%. And then the 20% can be a phase 2 or a phase 3 if they're not critical items that you're looking for. Lean on the ITIL framework, right? The success of similar organizations and the experience of consultants are tremendous. If you are in the energy business or you're in the education business, typically speaking, if you come to somebody like AMP, we can kind of give you references to people you can speak to and get that kind of information on what's been successful. Also, if you're a member of users groups, I strongly encourage you to speak to them as well. Process automation wherever possible to drive efficiency. Don't create automation for the purpose of creating automation. If it's going to make your life easier, it's going to decrease the amount of time that somebody has to spend doing something, then it is worth the return on investment that you're going to spend in creating automation. But to do it just for the purpose of being able to do it sometimes is counterproductive, so be careful there. Determine your KPIs and measurements. So again, this goes to my last bullet on my first slide. You want to make sure that you understand what your goals are for change management and being able to have those goals measurable so that you know that you're obtaining those or not and where you need to make adjustments. Define a training plan. This is extremely important, but what I want to emphasize to everybody who does training is just not a tool-related item. Training is really both process and tool. When you go to do training, make sure that you have somebody who understands not only the tool but the process so that when people are asking questions as to why something is some way, you have that ability to explain it. And the last bullet is one of those ones that we say and we sometimes ignore that we said it in the beginning. Adding more technology doesn't solve issues that arise from a poor change culture. You really need to make sure that you're defining what your business process is before implementing the tool. The tool is not going to fix a broken process.
Hey, Cheryl. And so one thing I wanted to add here is, we have people with different maturity levels when they come in to, have a Cherwell change management implementation. And I think that the balance just needs to be there. We've had people that are so excited about change management processes that they have worked to define, all of the processes and the roles and, have pushed this out to the organization and at the same time implemented the tool. And it's a really difficult thing to introduce a brand new process and a brand new tool at the same time. And usually the tool ends up taking the black eye. So we generally recommend that if you're kind of new to the change management space, just take it in logical steps. Have a roadmap for where you want to be, but you can't bite off a brand new, big, old formal process and a supporting that if it's the first time that the audience is seeing that. So we can help you find that balance, but that's probably the biggest thing. If you're on an enterprise tool and switching over to Cherwell and you're used to change management, you can put in a solid, meaty change management implementation. If you're just starting, let's keep it nice and sane and easy to go along with a roadmap to get where you eventually want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely a good statement there, Mary Lynn, because a process does not have to be complicated. A process just needs to be defined, and that process can be as simple or as complex as you need, but as you mature, that typically will become more complex. So keep it simple to begin with, and then, as you go through, like you said, roadmap those things that you want to do that you're not necessarily ready to do. So with that, Mary Lynn, I will turn it over to you.
Sounds good. So what I want to do is just really talk. I'm not going to actually pull up a system. I did snippets of them because it's just really hard clicking through next to get to approvals and go back to the dashboards. At any point after this webinar, just ping us if you'd like to have a tool demo. We can take you through that in about a half an hour as well. But what we wanted to highlight here are the different areas that Sherilyn did a great job talking about the process around change management. And now I'm just going to drop it down a little bit to the tool. And Cherwell does a really nice job of supporting the tenets of a formal change management process and allowing you to deploy that easily but with formality. So if you haven't seen change management in the tool, when you go into a change, you have different change types. I'm in a normal change right now, and this drop down here also has normal, standard, and emergency. And based on the type of change that you pick, you're going to either have different approvals in the case of emergency, or if you do a standard change, you're presented with a standard change library. And like Sherilyn had mentioned before, you can take a normal change and promote it, or request that it be promoted to standard. And then what you have is a standard change library that people can pick from, and you can pre-populate fields and make standard changes super easy, and yet they're being posted to the forward schedule change. And there is a record of all of the changes, no matter how small they are, if they fit into your process. The dashboards are just great within Cherwell. If you're using the tool now, you've probably developed a ton of them yourself. What I really like about the change management dashboards are that you can have different views of it. So you've got the change manager view who needs this overarching view, and then you also have, if you're familiar with the My Work dashboard, the ability that as a change requester or as a task owner to be able to go in and specifically see your work and get to that easily. This is just another view of some of the dashboards that are already out of box. Now this one is more focused on me as opposed to the change manager. So you can easily go to this and find the areas that you need to work on in change management. Within the change itself, there is workflow, and those workflows are driven by status changes or by approvals. So you can see up here on the top, we've got a classify, an assess, an implement, and a review. So let's talk about implementation of this for a minute. So we're always going to start with out of box, and we're always going to ask if you want something different, what the business reason is for modifying that, because it's a pretty solid process that follows ITIL tenets and can be implemented solidly. Having said that, within Cherwell, it's easily configurable to modify the phases of the workflow that you go through and the associated approvals. So I want to show you some of the out-of-box stuff, but I also want to bring up areas that we've had customers request that some modifications be done. And we have had customers request specific names that they're used to, either in their, if they're coming from Remedy or ServiceNow or HP, that are familiar to their audience, and it's very easy to modify those things as well. In the change, you'll see also for the normal and emergency, because it goes through several different phases, Cherwell doesn't hit you with a drinking from a fire hose on all of the fields. As you can imagine, each one of these different phases has different fields that are going to be populated. But why do you need to see them all at one time? It should only be as appropriate. So you can have a step view, which is a wizard-driven, or you can have an expanded view, which does show you down the line all of the different fields. So, the step view would show me, if I was in Classify, only the fields that need to be filled out for Classify, and I would click Next when I was ready to move into the assessment area. So I really like that part too, and being able to drive those fields only as needed. Okay, so tasks, I know you probably assumed this already, but tasks are a key part of change management. From an implementation perspective, we have seen this so many different ways. We have a customer currently that we're working with that require tasks to be put in prior to even the assessment approval. They believe that an assessment can't truly be done unless the people who are the approvers can see that there are tasks that have been assigned and teams are queued up to work on that. We have other customers that just use tasks very casually, they wait till the implementation phase, and they're only as needed. And a third way that we've seen people use these is by having automated tasks. If you're familiar with Cherwell Request Management, you know that, for example, the onboarding process has some very formal tasks that as soon as you open up that type of request are there. So Cherwell can easily, if you say that you have a certain type of normal change and that there are certain tasks that have to be and are generated as part of that change itself. Integration with the CMDB. Given a demo, I love showing pictures, so this is really always pretty cool to show in a demo. But, let's talk about realistically the CMDB related to change, and I know Sherilyn probably has some strong feelings around this as well. I do a lot of pre-sales demos, and I just love to show this view of the mapped relationships that can really nicely give you a view of the impact upstream and downstream that a change could potentially have. The reality is that this is not automated, and it takes some thought and work around it. And so we're often asked about, okay, so I can't boil the ocean, and there's no way I'm going to be able to map all of this stuff. The strategy that most of our customers are taking at this point are to identify their key applications and key business services and the infrastructure that's core to those, and only keeping the mappings current, focus on those, keeping the mappings current through change management so that you have, only the important things. Bill Sheridan does a really good talk about CMDB and what's important. And we have some customers that say, I have 200,000 configuration items in my CMDB. And, really the answer is, so what? I mean, that's really good if that's of value to you. It's even more valuable if you have 100 of them in there that are mapped to strategic infrastructure and are kept current. So Cherwell facilitates that. You can put in your upstream and downstream. You can track multiple configuration items to the change and then visualize what the potential impact of that change would be against those configuration items.
Yeah, and so just to add on to that, as far as the CMDB and maturity, it's ideally you would like to have a mature CMDB, but I would never say don't do change management because of the maturity level of your CMDB. You should be managing change on those items that you have in your configuration database, but because configuration management itself is very resource intensive and a lot of organizations don't have the resources to do that mature, don't let it stop you from doing change management. It might be a way that you tweak your change management, because you'll have to either manually put in information about your configuration items or so on and so forth. But once you got your change management in place and you have the resources for config, you definitely want to grow that out, because configuration management will definitely help facilitate your risk calculations and your understanding of how you're impacting services.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. I did a lot of screenshots here just because I wasn't doing the demo. So the approval results, we get a lot of questions about, for compliance to be able to track the approvals. And out of box, there is an approval history tab that will show you who approved it, when they approved it, and you can see that in this case there were different approvals depending on the type of change. And out of the box, you can have people that are in a different approval group that can do the assessment if it's a normal change or the implementation approval for normal versus emergency. So lots of ways to segment that. Approvals can be done in lots of different ways. They can be stacked approvals. They can be dependent approvals. You can vote. You can have majority. You can have raise of hands. There's just a lot of different ways that voting can actually happen as well. Forward schedule of change. Forgive me a little bit. I had a demo system that didn't have lots of stuff in it. But, this forward schedule of change is available to the people within the tool to look at and see the types of changes that are coming up. And you see there's a legend, and you can filter this. But we have a lot of customers now who are asking for this. It's enabled on the portal already. We used to have people say, oh my gosh, I never want my end users to see change schedules. Well, guess what? Business stakeholders are really knowledgeable now and feel that they need to be in the know of the things that could potentially impact their environment going forward. And so this forward schedule of change is available within the tool itself, can be pulled up within a change ticket, pulled up outside of a change ticket, but it's also available out on the portal. And you can limit the amount of information that's available to the end user, but at least you're allowing them to see what the upcoming changes are for the weekend that could impact their business services.
Yeah, and I'll give you a perfect example of this. We have an organization where their customer service department was actually receiving updates about changes that were made from their customers versus their IT department, because there were only certain methods of communication that were being used and that particular department didn't receive them. So the more ways that you can communicate within your organization, the more beneficial it is. That way, in this particular case, the customer service wouldn't be hearing about a change from the customers. They would have heard it from IT and been prepared for those phone calls that they received.
Yeah, good point. Here's that nomination for standard change that Sherilyn had mentioned. The way that it works out of box in Cherwell, I have to say that on my 701 system, this does have a bug. And we can talk about that at some point. If you're on 701, get on 702. But that's a whole other conversation. But the way that it works is that when you're in a normal change and it hasn't been approved to be a standard change yet, you can nominate it to be a standard change. And it creates a clone of your change ticket and takes it through the normal process and gets the approval. Now, the approval is not for that one specific one. That has its own life and is continue on as a change ticket. It's a parallel ticket that's saying, I want swap out printers and update the printer entries to be in the standard change library, which in Cherwell means that there are no approvals associated with them, and it is just something that gets opened, implemented, and closed with being on the forward schedule of change, but without going through the formal approval process. Like any other module within Cherwell, you probably already know this, but I just like to highlight the fact, especially around emergency changes and talking about having an incident or a problem open. A lot of our customers require that for an emergency change. As usual, these things are linked together easily. And in fact, problem management does it really well, because when you get into that process of identifying the root cause, known error, and the permanent fix, oftentimes you have to initiate the change. And one of the options from within the change is to close the associated problem and incidents as well. Let's see, was that a duplicate? Looks like it was. Oh, this one showed the problem, sorry. We talked about dashboards already a little bit, and this one is showing the My Work piece as well as the consolidated view. Oops, this looks like it had a couple of duplicate areas in it. Sorry about that. So we already covered dashboards earlier, and I think there's enough said about that. So at this point, I think from a tool perspective, I've kind of wrapped up my tool support areas. Sherilyn, are there any areas from an implementation perspective that stick out for you that we want to bring up?
No, I think I really wanted to, the stuff that you went through are key elements, right, that show that Cherwell really does align with ITIL and best practices. So it really is a good foundation for which to start your tool implementation. So at this point, I think we've covered most of that.
Well, good. So let me just remind everyone that if you've got questions, and I've got a few more here that I'm going to ask our team in just a second, but if you've got questions, you can ask them in the bottom corner. You've got a chat window. Direct those questions specifically to myself, Matthew Peoples, and I will bring them up on today's call. So Mary Lynn, I saw that you answered one of these questions in the chat itself, but I want to bring it up for the group. The question was around customer approvals. You mentioned that we've got a map that we've created that grants the ability to do customer approvals, and the question was, what versions did that work on? Can you take just 30 seconds and talk about maps and what version that supported briefly?
Yeah, so that map is just one piece of it. There is some manual activity that's documented also that goes with that. And what it does is within the tool itself, it allows you to identify a customer approval versus a user approval. And then it also up on the portal, so you have to make a couple of modifications up on the portal side to then show pending approvals. So we wrote it on 601, I think, but we have since applied it to all of our 701, 701, and 702 systems without any conflicts. So if you're interested in that, just let us know. And I had already offered, because we think it's really important that we want to make sure that, if you want the map, just let us know and we can assist you with any questions that you have around it.
And Mary Lynn, that map's free of charge, right? They go out to the Map Exchange on Cherwell's community, and they can download that at no charge, correct?
That's correct.
So most of you are familiar with the Map Exchange. We've got, 12, 13, 14 maps that we've got posted out there. Some are related to change management, which today's call talked about. We've got the change template library that's out there as well. Mary Lynn, you want to speak about that one real quick?
Yeah, so we talked about the standard change library, and what we did was we've implemented several other enterprise tools. So we feel like we have a good understanding of change management and the things that end up becoming standard changes. And out of the box, and I love Cherwell, and I'm a huge proponent, but out of the box, the standard changes are really, really weak. They look more like requests, install something on my desktop. So one of our maps is a standard change library where we've come up with a list of, 15 good examples of what we've seen as standard changes. And then what we've done is we've made it such that if you pick one of those, we have automatically, we've come up with template kinds of words for the description, for the priority, and I think 2 other fields that we pre-populate just to make it even easier to do. And that is a free map if you're interested.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary Lynn. So you've got consulting@ampemail.com. If you've got questions, feel free to shoot me an email. You can reach us at that email account, and I'll get that distributed over to whoever on our team is the right one to provide answers back. Mary Lynn and Cheryl Lynn, I'm going to throw you some other questions that came up here. You answered this early on, Cheryl Lynn, whenever you were doing your part of the presentation, but it came up a little bit later with some people that joined, I think, late. You referred to CAB several times, and I know you answered what a CAB was at the very beginning, but can you take a moment and talk about a CAB and who should be a part of a CAB in an organization?
Yeah, so a CAB is basically a change approval board. When a CAB is at a mature level, it will typically include managers that span across IT, and really the purpose of that group is to look holistically at the change. So if I'm putting a patch to the server, that group's not evaluating the fact, can you put the patch on the server? What they're evaluating is if I put this patch on the server and I take it down, how is that going to impact the business, especially if that server is providing a service to your customers. So what the CAB does is it evaluates it from not only from an IT perspective, but from a business perspective, and it helps as well to schedule things. So they're really not necessarily saying a yes or no. They may say yes, but we need to move it to this week because we have, a surge in customer calls on Fridays because maybe that's where they wanted it scheduled. Initially, those organizations that start out, who haven't had a CAB before, will start out with a smaller group of people who are involved in it. I'd strongly encourage people to keep that group to a minimum. And when I say minimum, people are going to ask, well, what's the number? There's no real magic number, but if you get, let's say over the 10 or 12 mark, what happens is those meetings become extremely long if people don't come prepared to the meeting. So that's just something that you as an organization have to decide who does it, but that's really what a CAB is about.
Good answer. Okay. So, Sherilyn, one other question I think that's probably better suited for you to answer. We talked the difference about what's the difference between a change and a request, but we got some questions around bug tracking tools. So if they've got things like Jira in their environment where they're tracking bugs and software development changes, that's very different than the change management we're talking about. We're talking about changes to the infrastructure. So are there times that we see customers doing an integration with Cherwell Change Management and some type of third-party bug tracking tool? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, if you look at a lot of organizations, you can talk about app dev and change management, but a tool like Jira, which takes in the bugs or requests, right, at some point they need to be implemented. And those changes to those applications, even though they are configuration changes to the application, are a change to an IT service, which is how we defined it in the beginning of this presentation. So because it is a change to IT service, it should become a change management. And I've had a lot of organizations that will take a tool like Jira and actually integrate it so it creates a change record in tools such as Cherwell.
Excellent. So to continue down that path, go back and I guess answer the difference between a change and a release, because I know you did that early on. I think we had some people that joined late. So what is the difference between a change and a request? I'm sorry, not a release, a change and a request.
Okay, so the difference between a change and a request is a request is anything your business or customer, and a customer can be internal IT, is requesting of any other part of IT. a request can become a change. So let's say I want a firewall, I'm requesting a firewall change. It can initiate as a request because I need a firewall change, but it actually can become a change record as well when I'm actually implementing the change itself to make that firewall rule change. There are also requests that don't become changes. Requests that don't become changes typically do not have an impact on your IT infrastructure, or the impact is extremely minimal, i.e. I need a new laptop. So adding a new laptop, does it change the composition of your infrastructure? Technically speaking, the answer is yes, but not to the extent where it's going to, impact your IT infrastructure. So requests are typically things that come into the customer, that come in from your customer base, again, internal or external, that don't require, that people are asking for, and then changes are going to be those things that are impacting your infrastructure or your IT service. Let me rephrase that, your IT service, and because of that, they need a change record in order to be implemented.
Excellent. Thank you, Cherwell. So you noticed as we've gone through this PowerPoint, I never really threw up a slide about AMP and who we are. If you're attending these webinars, you clearly have come across our website and know of us. We are recognized by Forrester Research as one of the top IT service management consulting companies in North America. It's the first and only time they've ever looked at consulting firms. We're very proud of that designation they've given us. We understand Cherwell and are very deeply entrenched in all things Cherwell. If you go look at their map exchange, other than Cherwell themselves, we are creating the most maps of their functionality and technology and putting those out there. We're strong with integrations. You clearly heard from today's presentation, we have a depth of knowledge around change management and helping customers deploy that in their environment. We can help you from a design standpoint, which is where Cherwell began our presentation, but if you've already got design and you just need that turned into code, we've got the technical teams that can do that as well. So I would love the opportunity to work with you. If you've got any questions, you can reach me by mpeoples@ampemail.com, or if you email consulting@ampemail.com, that'll get over here and somebody will get it over to the right hand. So with that, it doesn't look like we've got any other questions. Thank you, Cherwell. Thank you, Mary Lynn, for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. You will see our next scheduled webinar will be after the holidays, so happy holidays to everyone. If you've got topics you'd love to see us talk about and present, feel free to reach out to consulting@ampemail.com, and we'll be sure to cover those in something future. Thank you very much. Have a great day.